All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the War Room World War II content courtesy of YouTube. I am your host, Admiral Sigma Jones. My co host, Mr. Logic's Finest, is here as well. First and foremost, we just want to give a shout out to our subscribers. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in. We truly appreciate the love and support. Hope you all are doing well on this evening or this morning, depending on where you're listening in around the world. So, this particular podcast, we originally had it scheduled for Saturday night Pacific time, but I ran into some issues that I needed to take care of behind the scenes, and so we just decided to push it over into today, Sunday evening. But other than that, we definitely are still on track with the current content. We do have a few more details we're going to be covering as far as Hitler and the 1920s, but we will be wrapping up as far as those details pretty much this week. And then starting next week, we'll let you know by the end of this podcast who will be our next person in country we will be talking about in the 1920s. But before I get started, let me introduce once again the finest co-host there is when it comes down to World War II content, and that is Mr. Logic's Finest. How's it going, good sir?
I'm good. I apologize for being late. I cannot live up to that build up, but definitely not the finest. But I definitely try to be humble. I apologize for being late. I was talking to Dr. Phoenix earlier on. Had a great
Mm.
conversation as we always do, and then I had to step out for a bit and kind of lost track of time. So apologies for that.
Oh, no worries. No worries at all. In fact, I was actually doing a big conversation with Kitty Jones over the Black Rodents, and I looked at the time, I was like, oh yeah, I got a got a podcast I got to do for the War Room today. So no, definitely, sir, you're right on time.
Yeah, again, I'm sorry about that, man. It's just really enjoying this little mini vacation in Catalonia, Spain, and just taking some
Mm.
time. And I was just caught up with something. Let's leave it at that.
Well, it's something you mentioned Spain because I can't wait till we get into the 1930s and we
mm,
talk about the Civil War that was the predecessor into World War II that started in Spain.
Mr. Senor Franco, I do believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's what. I'm looking forward to that. Absolutely, absolutely looking forward to that. I have been, I have been interacting and watching with someone, as I told you, and I keep forgetting to send you his information, but um, he was a DoD contractor. He was an analyst. He taught at the Naval War College. He spent his career with the Navy as a civilian defense systems, and he also is a na- obviously a naval enthusiast, and especially World War II. And I've been learning a lot from him about World War II naval combat and tactics. You know, um,
Mm.
I'm no expert, never claim to be. It's definitely an interest of mine. Passion of mine. So I always like to engage in people who have credentials and taught the subject to actual sailors. And the thing that keeps coming back to me is how slow naval combat actually took place. Like it is not what we see in film and television. Maybe the Battle of Midway and the Solomon Islands campaign, but naval combat is slow and things are very far spread out. It's talking to him is fascinating. I'll say that much.
Wow, that's I already have my ears perked up about that. Yeah, we have to look to see once we get into the whole naval buildup for these countries. We would need to get in touch with him to see if he'd like to come on to give his expertise of what these nations were doing leading up to these particular battles, because it'll be interesting to kind of get some third party analysis to see what did they kind of see on both sides?
Yeah, because we were because I was talking to him, you know, about specifically the Iowa class battleships versus the Bismarck class battleships. And what he
Mm,
said was ultimately we will never know because they never fought each other. But on paper, people look at the speed of the Iowas and they look at the speed of the Bismarcks. He said the thing is that was under testing in real world conditions. The
mm-hmm.
fastest battleships were about 28 to 29 knots. So that speed advantage gone. Then you have the range. So the Iowas had 4 miles of range on their guns compared to the Bismarck, but the Bismarck was accurate out to a farther distance. Then you have to consider in radar. You have to consider in tactics of the commander. He said what he said was basically it really the engagements largely came down to the tactics of the admiral in charge of the battle group, and that to me was fascinating.
Right. And that would actually make sense because you could have the best weaponry in all of your naval setup, but if you got the wrong person leading that unit, it just goes to waste. For me, the perfect example of that is looking at the battleship Yamato.
Mm,
This
the monster.
arguably had to be the most deadliest battleship ever built. As far as if you go on what was, as far as its main belt, the
Mm-hmm,
type of guns it was using,
mm-hmm,
so many secondary armaments. But unfortunately, it was useless in its in the latter half of the war because first off the Japanese didn't use it much, and then when they did utilize it, they much rather had to do what's called a bump and run, where you just attack a little bit and then run off, rather than actually sticking that battleship into the thick of battle and see what it could do.
right. So okay, he explained to me the whole speed thing. So
Mm,
when large ships when large ships move through the water, they create a pressure wave. We think of water as water, but in fact, try to imagine it as it's somewhat of a solid mass. So you're displacing the water, you're pushing it out of the way as you move towards it. It
mm,
creates a bow wave away from you. At some point, it's going to hit the bottom, and that pressure is going to come right back up towards you. So that slows down ships. So I did not even know this. Ships are faster in shallower water than they are out in the open seas. I didn't know that.
right.
So that right there negates the speed advantage. And also, it doesn't matter how much raw power you put into a battleship. There comes a certain point you literally can't go any faster. Then you have to design the hull to compensate for those hydrodynamic forces. It has to be wide to account for the guns because it has to be a stable gun platform. You don't want when you fire your main guns the ship to literally move in the opposite direction
Mm-hmm.
or to pitch and roll. So when you take all of those things into consideration, the speeds were pretty much the same for the ships built in the mid to late 1930s and even during the war. Then when it came to the accuracy of naval guns, at the height of World War II, the most accurate guns were only around 30 to 35%.
Yeah,
That
that's
was it.
true.
So you're zigging, you're zagging, you're speeding up, you're slowing down, you're pitching and rolling and rising. And then these things they don't have brakes. So even when you come off the throttle, they take a long time to slow down. And even when you turn, they don't immediately turn. They don't
Mm-hmm.
actually turn. They kind of push their way around. So that's why naval engagements they take time and they happen very slowly. Again, just talking to him has just opened a world of knowledge to me.
Yeah, we definitely gonna have to keep in touch with him when we get a chance to dive deeper into the weaponry side leading up to World War II and even the battles, because I'm pretty sure he has a lot to share in that knowledge base. I definitely would like to pick his brains on a few few topics already.
Mhm.
All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and jump right into our last chapter um, right now for Hitler and everything. So we are in chapter 8. This is the final section before we start to transition over to the 1930s. So in this section, or excuse me, in this chapter, there's only 6 sections. So the way we are having this podcast set up, we're just going to go over the first 3 sections this podcast, and then our upcoming podcast is Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. We'll cover the last 3 sections, and then we'll just wrap everything up in regards to our final analysis of the Weimar Republic in the 1920s, as well as Hitler's moments within the 1920s. And so this is where we're going to get started off, chapter 8. And ironically, the title of chapter 8 is called Hitler's Secret Book from 1925 to 1928. So let's jump right into it.
Execute.
All right. So it starts off by saying Hitler was invited to spend New Year's Eve at Hoffman's home. He refused, but when the party was underway, a girl urged the photographer to phone the Führer and try again. None of whom had met him, nor were they disappointed. In his cutaway coat, he looked very smart, wrote Hoffman. He had not yet started to wear the lock of hair hanging from his forehead, and his air of modest reserve only served to enhance his charm. The women were particularly entranced by his little mustache. One pretty girl maneuvered Hitler under the mistletoe and kissed him. I shall never forget the look of astonishment and horror on Hitler's face. The wicked siren, too, felt that she had committed a fake pause, and an uncomfortable silence reigned. Bewildered and helpless as a child, Hitler stood there, biting his lip in an effort to master his anger. The atmosphere, which after his arrival had shown a tendency to become more formal, now became almost glacial. Hoffman tried to laugh it off. I'm glad that it didn't happen to one of the more elderly amongst my guests. But then, you've always had luck with the ladies, Herr Hitler. Not amused, the Fuhrer bade everyone a polite, cool farewell. Ever since release from Landsberg, he had lived in a semi-solitude. He was finding it difficult to adjust politically, as well as socially. Determined to confine his activities to behind-the-scenes discussions with Esser and Pawner, he refused to reveal his new plans and put off worshipful delegations who sought his advice and blessing. At the same time, he did not make the mistake of discouraging the adulation of rank-and-file followers, and his silence made them more eager than ever to hear his first speech. Hitler needed the concentrated solitude to become familiar with recent drastic political and economic developments. The regime in France, which had been demanding occupation of the Ruhr, had been replaced by a more conciliatory group, and a more equitable payment by Germany of war reparations had been recently instituted by the Allies. On the economic front, the establishment of a stable mark has stemmed the toboggan slide to economic chaos. The dual prospect of a peaceable settlement with France and economic recovery meant that Hitler had been deprived of political assets. On the other hand, a social change had come about which now offered him the chance to re enter politics on a national scale. Rapid technical developments, urbanization, dispersal of the population, and the industrialization of the past decade had upended the middle class. The small merchant, the independent businessman, and the farmer were in a state of uncertainty and fear. It was the middle class that had suffered most during the inflation. The margin of affluence, which had set these people above the working class, had been wiped out along with their savings and capital. Many blamed their misfortunes on the Reds and Jews, and their bitterness were already turning into hatred, making them receptive to Hitler's message of anti Semitism. So, what these few paragraphs is showing is Hitler having too long been released from prison. He was actually just been released on parole. And he now enters a new Germany that is far different than what he experienced before he went to prison. Now he's entering a country where there's a little bit of prosperity, where countries are now being able to uh, uh kind of work together with Germany rather than work against. And as we kind of showed with the Weimar Republic during this time frame, everybody's happy go lucky. And so to speak, all is right in the world because, the war reparations is coming down. We're not, so to speak, having to deal too much with inflation, but all is happy go lucky.
You know, the first thing that stood out to me was Hitler again showing his absolute his absolute brilliance and understanding how to manipulate people's emotions. Always
Mm-hmm.
leave them wanting more. So him being silent and not telling anyone what he was thinking or what he was doing, yes, that's very smart tactically and strategically, but also leave them wanting more. So even though he's actually said nothing, people it it elevates his status. Like, he doesn't say much. He's not speaking. I wonder what he's thinking. I wonder what he's doing. I wonder where he is. Like, do you realize how powerful that is in and of itself? It elevates you to a different status.
Right, because they were so used to, Hitler being robustious and
Hmm.
animate and everything. Now he's taking on this persona of being reserved, being silent, not being quick to speak.
The
And,
mystery
and like
man.
you said, and like you said, that actually caused the audience to be more curious about him to where why is he being silent? Why
Exactly.
is he being reserved?
Right. And Hitler, again, he's looking around and he's saying, okay, okay. He sees things are better. Things are better. So surveying the landscape, to find out, okay, where can he make his next move? Where can he find what has to be exploited? Because remember, when there's a chicken in every pot, there are no revolutions. So
Hmm.
he's trying to find out, okay, where are things still bad? Because that's my in.
Right, right. And it's interesting because, excuse me, we'll get into it because he actually predicts the economic downturn in his book Mein Kampf,
Mhm.
and when that economic downturn happens, it's almost as if people suddenly turn to Hitler. It's like, wow, this man is a prophet. Even though Hitler was just, give his ideas of what direction things may go, it's the mere fact that he was able to kind of pinpoint where that downturn was going to happen that suddenly brought a lot of people into his circle.
Exactly. Exactly. It's fascinating, man. I always say, rational thinking is unwelcome in most social situations. When you are the person who can set yourself separate, not so much above, just set yourself separate, then you, it's funny how you see sometimes the people will sometimes set you above if you're a leader. But when you set yourself separate, people interact with you differently. People look at you differently. People deal with you differently, you know? So now, segue. How can we apply that to present day certain situations?
Mm.
Certain people, you do not have an advantage because of your light skin color. It's how you conduct and comport yourself, how you express yourself, how you speak. Do you have a chip on your shoulder, or are you just producing and completely integrating into productive society? But I digress.
Yeah, let's not get too deep down that rabbit hole. I have made a mistake earlier last week going down a certain rabbit hole, and let's just say I have been told that the knowledge that we learned today is only because a certain powerful group controls all the information there is. But I digress. We'll move on. All right. Next it says the new year presented as many opportunities as difficulties, and his political future would depend on ability to cope with both. He made his first move on the fourth day of 1925 in the form of a gesture of truce to the new minister president of Bavaria, Heinrich Held. He spent half an hour alone with Held, pledging his loyalty and offering to cooperate in the fight against the Reds. He promised to confine himself to legal means in his future political struggles, and made such a favorable impression that Held reportedly remarked that evening, "This wild beast is checked. We can afford to loosen the chain." Alfred Rosenberg was not one of the few admitted to Hitler's company in these days of seclusion and preparation. He knew that Hitler was driving around the countryside with Esser, Amen, Hoffman, and Hamstigel, and he was irked at being excluded from this select company. "He valued me very much, but he did not like me," Rosenberg later complained. Piqued as well as concerned about the party split, Rosenberg persuaded his friend Ludek to write an article warning that the party was doomed unless its members stopped sniping at each other. After sending a copy of this article to Hitler, Ludek requested an interview. It took place at the little room at the Thyerstrasse, and after attacking Ludendorff and delivering a lecture on the Jews, Hitler finally got around to the article. Ludek, he said, could not possibly know the real facts of the putsch or the trial since he'd been out of the country. He derided Rosenberg's attempt to separate him from Esser. "That fellow has more political sense in his fingertips than the whole bunch of his accusers in their buttocks." Then sarcastically advised Ludek to see that Rosenberg come to his senses and stops playing the offended innocent. Although Hitler seemed to be rejecting Ludek's counsel to end party squabbles, he took it, intending to effect it in his own way. This decision to heal party wounds, combined with his promises to Minister President Held, soon bore fruit. On the 16th of February, the Bavarian government canceled the state of emergency and removed its restrictions on the NSDAP. 10 days later, the Völkischer Beobachter was back on the stands with a lengthy editorial by Hitler entitled "A New Beginning." He promised to confine himself henceforth to organization and policy, not personal and religious differences, and called for peace among all Völkisch elements within the party. They must unite, he said, to defeat the common enemy, Jewish Marxism. It was the new Adolf Hitler in action, determined to operate legally and willing to compromise for the sake of a party unity. At the same time, He was going to run the party his way. And despite a pledge to work with the governmental framework, he had not tempered his attack on his primal enemy, the Jew. On the following day, the 27th of February, Hitler made his eagerly awaited return to public life at a party convention in the Berger Brockler, where he had launched the putsch. His speech was scheduled to begin at 8 p.m., but at mid-afternoon, lines were already forming in front of the beer hall. By the time the police closed doors at 6 p.m., the large hall was jammed with 4,000 people. Another 1,000 were turned away. National Socialists from all over the nation were on hand, with three important exceptions: Raum, Strasser, and Rosenberg. "I won't take part in that comedy," the latter told Ludek that afternoon. "I know the sort of brother kissing Hitler intends to call for." Rosenberg was proud and refused to shake hands with a man he felt had forsaken him. There was almost as much excitement in the hall as there had been on the night of the putsch, and as Hitler marched down the aisle wildly enthusiastic, adherents waved beer mugs, cheered, and hugged each other. Lifting his eyes above the party leaders, he appealed to the multitude beyond. While his words were fervent, they were not designed to antagonize either faction. He didn't make the mistake of going into details of the squabbles of 1924. He ignored them. He called Ludendorff the most loyal and selfless friend of the movement, and urged all those who, in their hearts, remained old National Socialists to join together behind the swastika flag and crush their two greatest enemies, Marxism and Jews. The first was an appeal to revolutionaries like Esser, the second to Drexler and his more conservative Volkisch followers. Now, this is interesting. This particular incident, being that he's back in the public sector and all, he decided, I am going to change my tactics a bit. I'm not going to even talk about what happened in 1924 and the attempted putsch. Instead, I'm actually going to compliment those enemies that actually work with me. And I'm also going to tell them to, rather than focus too much on the primal enemies, Marxism and Jews, let's just focus on just our nationalism. Just the flag, the swastika, and, our nationalistic following. Very tactful by Hitler.
It was absolutely brilliant. Brilliant because, again, there is nothing wrong with nationalism. It's when you take it to an extreme.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if at this point he had already planned to take it to the extreme, but he understood the value and the power of nationalism. But again, he took it to the extreme, but very brilliant. So the people in his own party who backstabbed him, he reaches out and offers the olive branch. Smart.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who were his political enemies, he reaches out a hand with the olive branch and says, listen, instead of being enemies, let's focus on the real issue. Germany, getting the country back on its feet, and the common enemy of all of us, the Jews and Marxism. Again, brilliant. Because if you have half a brain in your head, you're going to say, okay, I backstabbed this guy. Now he wants to be friends. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
sleep with one eye open. And because you didn't, you paid the price. If you're the other guy, if you're an enemy, you'll say, okay, we were enemies. He's saying he wants to work together. Great. Same thing. I'm going to keep one eye on him. But there's an old saying, you only make peace with your enemies. So he's saying peace. We were enemies. Great. But I'm of the opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, both camps, they dropped the ball. He
Mm.
says, "You won, he lost, he went behind bars." Do you really think a person is going to forget that? But history kind of proves me right. But what do I know?
Well, sir, I'm in the same boat too. This is where I fault the the people who put him behind bars into thinking that, oh well, being in solitude for a little bit of time should be able to change his mind and everything. That maybe only works at best 10% of the time. When you does somebody wrong and they have to spend years of solitude behind bars or just any place of seclusion for a bit, very rarely do they forget it.
Yeah, that's not someone I would want that close to me. It's a case of keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. Yeah, I would keep him in arm's length, but at arm's length, so I can watch him and let him prove that he's not trying to undermine me. But the whole time, this is as close as you're getting. You're not getting close enough to me to hurt me. Close enough
Right.
so I can keep an eye on you, but I'm not bringing you close enough to ever, because it is what it is. Maybe I'm projecting myself into that line of thinking, but hey, man, self-preservation is supposed to come natural, but apparently, I guess not.
Nah, I'm with that too. Shout out to Free Solo. Good to see you, sir. Next, it says, after an inspirational appeal to national regeneration, it is madness to believe that a great people of 60 or 70 million cannot be destroyed. It perishes as soon as it loses its drive, for self-preservation. He turned his attention to the party officials at the front tables. He neither asked for their loyalty and support nor offered any compromise. He ordered them to join the crusade or get out. If anyone comes and puts conditions to me, excuse me, then I say to him, my friend, wait and see what conditions I will put to you. I am not out to get the great masses. After a year, you can judge, my party comrades, if I have acted correctly, and that it is good. If I have not acted correctly, then I will place my office back in your hands. Until that moment, however, I alone lead the movement, and no one makes conditions for me, so long as I personally assume all responsibility. And I unconditionally assume responsibility for everything that happens in the movement. The frenzy in his manner was communicated to the audience. Cries of Heil rang out. Women wept as the crowd pressed from the rear, climbing onto chairs and tables. Men who had been bitter enemies surged to the platform and shook hands, some of them unable to restrain tears. Then Max Amen shouted, the wrangling must stop. Everyone for Hitler. Rudolf Buttmann of the German Nationalist Party came forward to make an emotional announcement that all of his doubts had suddenly melted away within me as the Führer spoke. Buttmann's use of this title, hitherto uttered only in private, underlined Hitler's overwhelming success. From now on, he would be the Führer in public. He had not only unified the NSDAP, but established the leadership principle, the unquestioned rule of one man. Drained emotionally as well as physically, Hitler left Munich that evening with Winfried Wagner. He and a few aides, stayed overnight at her home in Bayreuth. But their presence was such a secret that the younger children of the family would not learn about it for years. The resurrection of Hitler was followed the very next day by a political development of significance. In the national elections occasioned by the death of Ebert. 78-year-old Field Marshal von Hindenburg became the second president of the Republic. It was obvious that the sympathies of this hero of the right did not lie with the Republic, and while he attempted to remain neutral, he did little to strengthen the Republican forces. There continued to be frequent cabinet crises, often over trivial issues such as the conservative proposition to award a large financial indemnity to the Hohenzollerns. When this was carried over, vigorous socialist protests, a new bill was introduced to indemnify all dispossessed princes. This too was passed despite a socialist referendum to override it. Even the question of the colors of the German flag produced a cabinet crisis, and Chancellor Hans Luther was forced to resign over it. It seemed inevitable that this change in national politics should add impetus to Hitler's rise in power. Impetus to Hitler's rise in power, But his return to the politics of the beer hall had been too sudden and triumphant to suit the Bavarian government. It only proved how dangerous his gift of oratory was to the state. He had injected new life into the party too fast, too excessively, and the police forbade him to address 5 mass meetings set for early March on the grounds that he had inflamed the Burger Brawl audience with such violent phrases as fight Marxism and Judaism, not according to middle class standards, but over corpses. So I find it interesting that and we talked about this before with the Weimar Republic. The political system in the Weimar Republic was just so unstable. You had parties that they didn't have enough to get the majority of the votes. So what did they do? They would team up with the opposing party to see if they can get the votes, which in most cases they would. But then when it came time for the actual policies and being able to get things going, that's when the chaos ensued and you couldn't get things going politically, which showed why for the first early years of the Weimar Republic in the 1920s, it was just a complete disaster.
Of course it was, because the whole problem with coalition government, it sounds good, but in reality it's not, because you're forming a coalition because you don't have enough people who buy into what you're selling. And then so that was the first problem right there, that the Weimar Republic wasn't giving enough of what the people wanted. They were just another voice. They were not the best voice or the loudest voice. And then they compounded that problem with, when they came into power, the 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 local politicians and the local political chiefs, for lack of a better term, they kept them in place. Huge, major mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Major mistake. And it's funny how, again, when Hitler came back, as we just said, he's laying low. He's assessing the lay of the land. He's seeing what's what, how things are going. Things are going better. But then he's seeing, the weakness that the Weimar Republic started with, it's still there, and it's only gotten worse. So he just planted his little seed and just got his wedge in there and keep getting it deeper and deeper and widening it. And as you see, it's one day people woke up and didn't realize, oh crap, here we go again. A different direction, but here we
Yeah.
go again.
Right. Well, let's continue. Hitler protested the ban in person. Those who want to have a fight with us can have one, he told police officials. Whoever attacks us will be stabbed from all sides. I will successfully lead the German people in their fight for freedom. If not peacefully, then with force. I repeat, this sentence I repeat emphatically for the benefit of the police spies so that no erroneous reports will be circulated. These were strong words for a man on parole, and the end result was a ban on speaking in public throughout Bavaria. Open NSDAP meetings could be held, but not if their Führer spoke. Before long, the proscription extended to almost every German state. Hitler had been deprived of his major political weapon. He was forced to transfer his platform to the homes of his wealthy supporters. He spoke, recalled Heinz Haushofer, whose father took him to a Munich salon, as if he were at the Circus Crow, except that he remained seated. It was terrible, shouting and arm waving. He was not interrupted. He just spoke and spoke, like a record running in a groove, for an hour or an hour and a half until he became absolutely exhausted. And when he was finished and breathless, he just sat down, once more a simple and nice man. It was just as if he switched into another gear, and there was no in between. The ban obliged Hitler to confine himself to rebuilding the party, and he tirelessly went from one closed meeting to another in Munich, exhorting audiences much as he had done in the Burger Brückkeller. By grassroots technique, shaking hands with men, kissing the hands of women, and holding innumerable intimate conversations, he came into contact with the entire metropolitan membership. He succeeded not only in solidifying his magnetic attractions to the commonalty, but in winning complete organizational control of the city party. At the same time, Esser and Streicher roamed Bavaria, duplicating Hitler's tactics as they rallied local organizations behind the Führer. By the end of March, Hitler controlled almost all Bavarian locals, but he was forced to turn over the fate of the party in North Germany to Gregor and Otto Strasser. The first was a good organizer and a gifted speaker, and could, as a delegate to the Reichstag, travel free on railroads. After the inspiring speech in the Burger Brawl, he pledged his allegiance to Hitler, but Otto, already a clever journalist despite his youth, had reservations. How long, he wondered, would the honeymoon with Hitler last? Hitler accepted his enforced retirement from public life, much as he had his imprisonment, and took advantage of his opportunities. He utilized his free time to establish a solid party apparatus with the help of two colorless but efficient bureaucrats, Philip Bohler and Franz Xavier Schwarz. The first became executive secretary of the party, an owlish-looking individual who invariably bowed to Hitler before addressing him. He was obsessed with details. Schwarz, formerly an accountant at the Munich City Hall, was party treasurer. He brought to his job the talents of adding machine and the spirit of a miser. Together, the two men, by subordinating themselves completely to the Führer, became indispensable to the party machinery. The efficient depersonalization of the party's internal organization by Bohler and Schwarz enabled Hitler to concentrate on long-range political strategy, write articles, and travel extensively in the North to make personal appearances at closed party meetings. He also had the leisure to repair broken friendships, chastise recalcitrants, bring opponents together, and attend to personal problems. He reinstated Rosenberg as editor of the refounded Völkischer Beobachter, then wrote him a letter praising his integrity and calling him a most valuable collaborator. A few days later, Hitler wrote another letter and solved a nagging personal problem: deportation to Austria, by facing it directly. He requested the city officials in Linz to cancel his Austrian citizenship since he intended to become a citizen of Germany. 3 days later, the provincial government of Upper Austria issued an emigration permit absolving him from allegiance to the Austrian state. For a fee of 7.5 shillings, Hitler was freed of the threat of deportation. And though he was not yet a German citizen, and consequently unable to vote or hold elective office, he was confident that this matter could be resolved when it became necessary. Now, good sir, I know you have something to say on this. Go right ahead.
I was just going to say that it is amazing. Like I always tell SKC, history is written by the victors. People
Right,
don't even know Hitler was not even German. He was literally not German. He was born and raised in Austria. He was Austrian. He lived most of his life in Austria. He only lived about half of his life in Germany.
right.
But, you know,
Well, I just find it interesting that he's like, look, I'm going to get rid of this issue once and for all. I'm going to contact my homeland and tell them, hey, I want to cancel my citizenship. Whatever the cost, I'll pay for it. And so to speak, um, from now on, I'm only a German citizen and not an Austrian citizen. And I mean, you can say what you want about Hitler's way of thinking, his background, whatsoever. The man truly loved Germany,
right.
and he really wanted to see the best out of Germany. So for him to forsake his birthplace to become a citizen of another country, I have to say, not many people in today's world are that willing to give up their birthright to become a citizen in another place.
Yep, exactly. You know, it really just speaks to the strength of his personal conviction, if nothing else, which is a lot more than you can say for a lot of people.
Right, right. And shout out to Masculinity in the chat. Good to see you, sir. Next it says, of more immediate concern were the rebellious actions of the contumacious and egocentric Captain Rom. From the beginning, he had attempted to make the SA his private army rather than Hitler's political instrument. And while the Fuhrer was in prison, he had formed a new organization from stormtroop remnants under the name the Front Bond. Convinced that everything he had been working for since the putsch would be lost if he subordinated the Front Bond to the party, Rom presented Hitler with the memorandum on the 16th of April that the 30,000 men of the Front Bond could be the foundation of a national political organization. But it must be under Rom's absolute authority. His request was accompanied by appeals to their past friendship and a vow of personal loyalty. Hitler had learned how disastrous it was to be dependent on an organization he did not control. Determined to make the new SA solely his instrument, he demanded that the Front Bond accept his personal authority at once. In an apparent effort to apply pressure, Rom tendered his resignation from the Front Bond and requested a written acknowledgement of his action from the Fuhrer. After waiting for an answer in vain, He again wrote Hitler on the last day of April. I take this opportunity, he concluded, in memory of the fine and difficult days we have lived through together, to thank you, he used the familiar der, for your comradeship, and to beg you not to exclude me from your personal friendship. There was still no reply, and the following day, Rahm announced formal resignation of his offices and withdrawal from politics. By maintaining silence, Hitler had forced Rahm to become a man without a party or a front bond, and was himself free to set up a revitalized essay tailored for his own purposes. Rahm was shocked and hurt. He complained bitterly, according to Ludeck. Though he often does what we advise, he laughs in our faces at the moment, and later does the very thing as if it were all his own idea and creation. I've never seen a man so magnificently unaware that he is adorning himself with borrowed plumage. Usually he solves suddenly, at the very last minute, a situation that has become intolerable and dangerous only because he vacillates, and procrastinates. And that's because he can't act as clearly and logically as he can think and talk.
Bingo.
Hitler,
That right there. I apologies for my interruption, but he nailed Hitler on the head, and that plagued Hitler all throughout the war.
yeah, that's a perfect analogy right there by Rom to say that's because he can't act as clearly and logically as he can think and talk.
Yeah.
In other words, Hitler is only about the moment. When it comes down to long term strategic moves, especially those in regards of military background, that's where Hitler definitely lacks that ability.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at this. He laughs in our faces at the moment. He is unaware he's adorning himself with borrowed plumage, and at the last minute, a situation that has become intolerable and dangerous only because he vacillates and procrastinates, and that is Hitler. That's what cost him the beer hall putsch, and that's what cost him during the war.
Right.
Spot on, absolutely spot on analysis.
Well, he's not done yet. He says Hitler wants things his own way and gets mad when he strikes firm opposition on solid ground. And he doesn't realize how he can wear on one's nerves. Doesn't know that he fools only himself and those worms around him with his fits and heroics. But nobody is perfect, and he has his great qualities. Apparently, there's nobody else who would do better than he. Rom, who had so freely bestowed upon the humble corporal the gift of his due, was caught between admiration and contempt.
Now, doesn't that bring us back to the early days in the early 20s before the putsch? Whenever Hitler was introduced to an academic or an intellectual, they practically would laugh in his face and said, this guy's a moron. He's a great
Mm-hmm.
public speaker. He's emotional. He can whip a crowd into a frenzy, but he can't hold an actual intellectual conversation. And if you ask him any to have a conversation of actual long term substance, this this guy's a joke. And Hitler would always dismiss or want nothing to do with a person who was an academic or an intellectual who did not buy into his BS, basically.
Good sir, I am laughing because for the audience that listening, if you really want to see an example of this, of what my co-host just says, as far as Hitler disliked the intellectuals, and he gets stumped when an intellectual is able to give concrete opposition, and Hitler just wants to shut them down. To give you a perfect example in an experiment like that, go find one of these conspiracy theorists and just let them give you all their arguments, and don't even try to, so to speak, give counter arguments yet. Just let them. And actually, SKC is a master at this because he knows how to get a lot of these people to hinge themselves. But just let them talk as if you just want to know, and you just want to find out as far as their way of thinking. And then every now and then, just add little curveballs into their own sentences, and just watch how the wheels in their head just come to a complete stop. That's the same thing with Hitler when it comes to intellectuals.
As Casey and I have had this conversation in private numerous times, and also you've been there a few times, and I told him, I said, as Casey, the difference between you and I used to be you. It's amusing to you, and it used to
Mm.
amuse me. But I told them, as you get older, you're gonna reach an age, and you're gonna get to a point. It's gonna stop amusing you, and these people will no longer amuse you, and their abject stupidity will simply give you headaches, and you're just gonna walk away. Because I said, listen, I was the same with that guy. I can do it if I'm in the mode, but that rarely happens. It's just, you know what? I'm just gonna I'm just gonna drop a nuclear bomb on you of rational thinking and facts and information, and destroy everything you have to say and be done. Because talking to you and exposing your stupidity, it no longer amuses me. But hey, I get it. I used to do the same thing. So when I see SKC do it, I smile and just laugh. Like, things have come full circle for me.
Well, I'm definitely still in that circle with SKC where it really depends. If I know a talking point or an argument is just complete nonsense, then I will gladly exit the back door,
Mm.
and just pretend like I was not even there. But every now and then there will be a conversation that, even though it's just downright horrendous, but it's entertaining, to where I will pull SKC. It's like, okay, can you explain this more to me? Like, how can I become a thinker like yourself?
Okay, listen. We have to get back into this, and we will. But I'm just going to say this because I happened to catch that stream that you did. I caught the replay a few days later,
Mm.
and all I can say is I had no idea that I had been using Jesuit math. I thought 1 plus 1 equals 2. I thought 2 plus 2 equals 4. I thought 4 divided by 2 is 2. And I thought that multiplication is rapid addition and division is rapid subtraction, and that all mathematical processes come from those two things. And that in geometry, the interior angles of a triangle always equal 180 degrees. The interior angles of a square or a quadrilateral always equal 360 degrees. But hey, what do I know? What do I know? I've been using Jesuit math my whole life. Okay, what do I know?
Yeah, let let's move on from that rabbit hole, because that
Yeah.
was a completely. I fault myself. I should have definitely not jumped into that rabbit hole. But SKC asked me for some advice. I went up there, and I did not expect the type of vitriol that I experienced. But that's
Now,
that.
now, I have not. caught the replay of SKC stream yet. I caught your stream that you did when SKC asked you to make a stream, and it was just you and him speaking. I have not gone back yet and watched the stream that precipitated it because I don't know if my head can withstand hearing about Jesuit.
I'm gonna be quite honest, sir. It's probably best you don't. So it is making my hurt even replaying that thought process in my head. So let's continue with actual facts.
Let's just get back into it.
All right, so we are now in section 2 of chapter 8. It says, that spring, at least 2 of Hitler's personal dreams were realized. First, he managed somehow to acquire a new red Mercedes, in which he spent many pleasant hours touring the Bavarian countryside with his bosom companions. He also established an auxiliary headquarters in the mountain village of Berchtesgaden. In this breathtaking scenic area, he always found refreshment and mental stimulation. He reveled in the simple life and would wander the hills wearing leather hosen. Having to change into long trousers was always a misery to me. Even with a temperature of 10 below zero, I used to go about in leather shorts. The feeling of freedom they give is wonderful. At first, he stayed at the Pension Moritz on the Obersalzberg in a small cottage above the main building. Here in privacy, he finished writing this first volume of his book. His principal sounding board was Rudolf Hess, who had become private secretary at 300 marks a month. But he also sought editorial advice from Father Bernhard Stempfel, the former editor of an anti-Semitic newspaper, and Hafstigel, who set to work crossing out superlatives. Hitler almost always reinstated what the latter eliminated, as well as his efforts to wean him away from the provincial views of men like Hess and Rosenberg. You cannot have a Waltenstock, said Hafstigel, unless you have viewed the world. He suggested Hitler travel abroad during the lull enforced by the speaking ban. In 3 or 4 months, he could visit America, Japan, and India, as well as France and England. What would happen to the movement if I did that? The party structure had fallen apart while he was in prison and had to be rebuilt. Hafstigel's observation that he would return full of new plans for the future nettled Hitler. What curious ideas you have, he said. What do you think I can learn from them? And why should I try to learn anyone else's language? I am too old and have no interest and no time. Now, I want to pause here because this last statement by Hitler, as far as traveling to other countries and learning new cultures, I just find it interesting that a lot of Western people, especially Americans, have the same mentality.
Exact mentality. They are insular, completely insular. They have zero worldview. They think the world revolves around them and their country and nothing else. They're uncultured heathens. That's what they are. They're uncultured heathens.
I mean, just look at the sentence he said. What do you think I can learn from them? And why should I try to learn anyone else's language? I mean, doesn't that sound like somebody who say, well, why you need to go over to that country? We have all the things you're looking for here.
Oh man, get out of there. But that's not what you want to hear from a world leader, or that's that's not what you want to hear from the leader of a country. That's not what you want to hear. That is scary, because
Right.
how do you deal on the world stage with leaders of other countries if you have a provincial mindset? You, my good sir, have always said if you have a tribalistic mindset, you cannot survive in this world anymore.
True.
And that is not a concurrence of the quote unquote digital age, because we're looking here. The world was changing around our good friend Adolf, and he couldn't see it.
Mm-mm.
How do you? It is unfathomable to me how a world leader can bury his head in the sand and be insular. That is such a recipe for failure. However, you do have a certain someone who, when he makes public appearances in front of television cameras and he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about, the people standing directly behind him laugh and joke. When you have a Supreme Court justice laughing at you at what you just said, I mean, come on, come on, come on. Dementia Joe is a joke, but I digress.
All I can say is this: going forward, the next time I hear somebody say, "Oh, there's no need for us to travel or go to other countries and everything. The country I'm in right now, wherever it is, it's the best country in the world. There's no need to do that." I'm just gonna turn around and say, "Sounds to me you and Hitler have a lot in common."
You know what? You know what? You should tell that person. You should tell that person that I don't ever want to hear you utter the words oppression, supremacy, or legacy of anything ever out of your mouth.
True.
I don't want to hear it. Because if you're telling me you have everything you need where you are, and it's the greatest country in the world, why should you leave? Then I don't want to hear you use those buzzwords, because clearly you don't have to deal with legacy, and you're not oppressed, and there is no supremacy. But anyway, getting back to the article at hand.
Right on. Next paragraph says, Hamstickle offered to teach him English so he could read British and American newspapers and understand something of the broader world outside of Germany. While never refusing the offer, Hitler could never make up his mind to accept it. And even the influence of Helen Hamstickle was waning. In hopes of instilling in him some of the social graces, she suggested he learn to waltz. He refused on the grounds that it was an unworthy preoccupation for a statesman, and after her husband noted that Washington, Napoleon, and Frederick the Great all enjoyed dancing, retorted that it was a, quote, stupid waste of time, and these Viennese waltzes are too effeminate for a man to dance. This craze is by no means the least factor in the decline of their empire. This is what I hate about Vienna.
That is interesting. As a man who loved Wagner, but you don't like waltzes. Okay. Okay. There was more to Wagner than just the Ride of the Valkyries, but okay.
Right. And I'm sorry, what we're seeing, we are seeing a man or an individual who, yes, he has so much love and devotion for Germany. He truly is enthralled with its history and its might and its potential. But at the same time, we are clearly seeing an individual that is so close minded and is such an awkward socialist that even just learning to dance Just learning the basic elements of it and its benefits. It's like it's these stuff like this that is causing the decline of these empires. And it's like, good grief. Ugh.
You know, this mindset, this mentality is mirrored by an entire demographic as a whole in the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
Certain demographic, they think the same way. Closed minded, insular, uneducated heathens. How you cannot compete on the world stage if your head is in a box. It doesn't work that way.
No,
And that's the reason why you're in the situation that you know what? I'm getting out of there. I'm getting out of there.
I hear you. But again, I just want to point out to the audience like, we hear about how, so to speak, technology is making people so out of place and less likely to interact and everything. No, 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 no. Far from it. People like this, what we hear about Hitler, this was happening even before technology was an afterthought. There was just individuals who simply were closed minded. No matter how much you learn from other cultures, no matter how much you learn from other environments, and you being a representation of the growth of being a global thinker, there was just individuals, no matter what, they were pretty much just antisocial. If you didn't think or behave in the ways that they believe, they consider you a black sheep.
I was always told only a fool thinks he has nothing to learn.
Yeah,
So,
I heard that too.
and if you are the leader of a nation, if you were the leader of a nation, I would think that it is in your best interest and it behooves you to know as much as you can in order to effectively do your job and lead your nation. Now,
Hmm.
you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar, you don't have to be an astrophysicist, but in that case, understand what you know and what you don't know, and make sure you surround yourself with people who are knowledgeable in the things that you don't know and listen to their counsel. And as you're doing so, continually learn and teach yourself so that you don't walk into a situation with another person and you can't have a conversation on their intellectual level. Now, compound that times 1,000 when you are the leader of a nation.
Yeah.
But, 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 the earth is flat and it's surrounded by an ice wall and there's a firmament and we've never been to space and Jesuit math is wrong. Okay, I got you. Now,
Okay, yeah, let's move on.
yeah, moving on, getting back to the article. I'm sorry, I've just been sitting on that for like two days now. Like my God, I can't. Okay, I'm sorry. Back to the article.
Good sir. I'll tell you, as somebody who has been down that rabbit hole last week, I applaud you. You definitely don't want to go down there. That is one rabbit hole where I'll tell anybody, save your sanity for something else. All right. Next it says, perhaps this rejection of Helen has something to do with her rejection of him the previous Christmas Eve. He was turning to other women for solace. Just across the street from his new rooming house in the town of Berchtesgaden, where he lived, in his own words, like a fighting cock, was a boutique run by the Ryder girls, Annie and Mitzi. If one can believe Maurice, Mitzi caught the Führer's eye while he was walking his Alsatian in the Kerr Park. A friendship between Prince and Mitzi's police dog led to a flirtation between the owners. Hitler invited Mitzi to a concert, but her older sister protested on the grounds that Hitler was 20 years older than her 16-year-old sister. Right.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Personally, I'm okay with, listen, it is what it is. Older men, younger women. But 16, eh,
Right?
maybe it's the age we live in now because 18 is considered an adult. But 16, again, it's the times we live in now. Because there was a time where women were married at 14, 15, having babies at
Hmm.
16. But, also people really rarely lived beyond the age of 50 and 60. But,
Right. Ah, I'll just put it like this. It's very interesting where we're getting to see the personal lifestyles of these World War II leaders. And all I can say is they were humans just like everybody else.
yeah, what a 36-year-old man sees in a 16-year-old girl, I don't know. I don't get it.
Right. Right. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but hey, back in the days, this was considered somewhat common. I would put it.
It's actually, all right, we're going to tiptoe really quick. It's
Mhm.
cultural because there is a certain culture that I happen to be quite fond of where this is quite normal, even now.
Right.
Even now. I'm just going to leave it right there and just gently walk away.
Right on. Next it says Hitler left in mortification, but soon returned with an invitation to both sisters to attend a party meeting. Excuse me. Years later, Mitzi claimed that Hitler went beyond flirtation. He called her Mitzerl, compared her beautiful eyes to his mother's, and asked for a kiss. When she refused, the Führer declared that they must not see each other again. But before long, he was walking her around the lake. At a secluded spot, he put his hands on her shoulders and suddenly kissed her. He said, I want to crush you. He was full of wild passion. Before long, they were lovers, and while she had visions of marriage, he only talked of renting an apartment in Munich where they could live together. Hitler found feminine stimulation of a different nature from Winifred Wagner, who accepted him uncritically. He became a hero in the household and delighted in playing the role of the mysterious figure fleeing from enemies, bent on assassinating him. In the dead of night, he would steal into Villa Vonfred. Late as it was, recalled Fridolin Wagner, he never failed to come into the nursery and tell us gruesome tales of his adventures. We listened while he made our flesh creep, showing us his pistol, which, of course, he carried illegally. A small one that he could hide in his palm, but it held 20 bullets. Then it was that he told the children that the bags under his eyes had been caused by poison gas in the war. At Vonfred, he was called Wolf. Everybody liked him, even the new Schnauzer, which snarled at strangers. But the children were particularly attracted to him. He drew them quite effortlessly with his hypnotic power. His life was fascinating to us because it was completely unlike ours. It all had a storybook quality. On the 18th of July, the first volume of his book was published in Munich by Eher. At Eamon's suggestion, the title had been changed to Mein Kampf, the name he had given his diary. Sales were good, a little under 10,000 by the end of 1925, but it was criticized then and later as abominably written, pompous, and torgid. It read like a Horatio Alger novel grafted onto a political tract. Even its subtitle, a reckoning, was novelistic. Even so, the detailed subjective portrayal, self serving as it was, of the development of a young man's personal and political convictions gave insight into the nationalistic Volkish wave sweeping across Germany. Since his release from prison, Hitler's anti Semitic diatribes had been overshadowed by preoccupation with party politics. The book was the channel for these feelings, and here he developed the theme to new heights. He made it clear that his hatred and fear of Jews was the center of his private life as well as his political career. At the end of the chapter describing his blindness at Pasewalk, he flung down the gauntlet. We cannot bargain with the Jews, only present them with a hard either or. But I was now resolved to become a politician. And in his role as politician, it would be his mission to solve the Jewish question with radically harsh methods and in the name of God. Therefore, I am now convinced that I am acting as the agent of our Creator by fighting off the Jews. I am doing the Lord's work. To the growing army of racists in Germany, the pages of Mein Kampf were an inspiration, and their author, the personification of their struggle against all enemies at home and abroad. Now, isn't it interesting? And it never ceased to amaze me, no matter if it's religious leaders or politicians. I would say 90% of the time, if you listen to these particular groups of people, politicians and religious leaders, they will always tell you it was God who called me to be in this position. It was the Lord that told me I needed to become such and such position. And I be scratching my head sometimes because it's like, hmm, are you quite sure that this so called God called you to that? Or there was any personal agendas tied to it?
Bingo. And nobody wants to say that. You know, it's like we all tiptoe around it, we all dance around it, but no one's guy. But not for nothing, but this is you talking, okay? You're you're hearing voices, and you have a personal relationship with God, and God has called you. Okay, great. Get on the phone. Let me talk to him. I want to hear this message too. It's like, guy, it's it's you. It's always been you, and it's all about you. You know, it's like they're such egocentric narcissists. It's amazing, staggering, absolutely staggering.
I always laugh, especially with these religious leaders, when sometimes they'll come to me and be like, Sigrid Jones, the Lord have told me to give you this message. Nowadays, before they continue, I'd be like, well, could you tell that same God that my line is always open so he could tell me personally?
Yeah, how about that? How about that? How about that? You know, the funny thing is, you know, more blood has been spilled on this planet in the name of religion than almost anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
But, you know, hey, I don't know, man. I don't get it. I just don't get it. I reject it out of hand. But to each his
Yeah.
own.
Yeah, to each their own. I mean, personally, I'm just kind of one where, hey, you know, um, I have my own personal relationship with the creator, and far as I know, me and him are pretty much on good terms. So if you want to know about it, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'm just gonna live my life, and you do your thing.
Listen, I say like this: unless you can tell me that you talk to whoever or whatever and you're hearing messages, unless I can interact with that person on a real time basis like I am with you right now, you're telling me fairy tales.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And I don't want to hear you're not supposed to know the mysteries or it's beyond us and faith doesn't work that way. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, if I can show you something that you can interact with on a real time basis, like we are right now, I don't want to hear anything, but I'm going to get out of there.
Yeah, I'm gonna get out of there too. Next, it says Hitler must have known that giving Gregor Strasser full power to reorganize the NSDAP in North Germany would be risky, and the more successful he became, the more dangerous he would be as a political rival. While anti Semitic, Strasser was no reactionary. His political philosophy could be traced to Spengler and the frontline socialism of the war, based on the elitist principle that leadership of the proletarians must come from the military. He was a typical left wing National Socialist, and this made him particularly useful in bringing party revolutionaries back into line. A husky, outgoing man, he would move crowds as well as individuals, and by late summer, help bring more prosperity to the cause than Hitler had expected. The number of cells in some sections doubled and even tripled. This increase came largely through Strasser's appeal to the working class and his freedom from the autocratic control of the Munich leadership. In early September, the struggle against the South became an open issue at a party conference in Hagen. Gregor Strasser had called the meeting to form a coalition against Munich bureaucracy. The conferees naively hoped to pry the Führer from his from his reactionary Bavarian advisors so he could lead Germany toward a revolutionary Volkisch millennium. Strasser's program was endorsed. The delegates voted to unite for greater efficiency in organization and propaganda, and approved publication of a series of articles expressing programmatic policies that included economic reforms verging on national Bolshevism. Their editor was to be a brilliant 29-year-old who had replaced the methodical Himmler as Strasser's secretary. Joseph Goebbels was just over 5 feet tall.
Uh
And
oh.
yes, sir, this is where we get to meet the godfather of propaganda.
The inner circle: Himmler, Goebbels, Hess, and oh god, his name escapes me. The leader of the Luft, Goering.
Yep, Mr. Goring. Joseph Goebbels was just over 5 feet tall and weighed not much more than 100 pounds. Moreover, his small frame had been racked by infantile paralysis, leaving him with a deformed foot. Goebbels was compensated by a variety of talents. He was a facile writer, and despite an appearance of frailty, was a commanding figure on a platform with his magnetic baritone voice, expressive hands, and appealing dark eyes. Son of a Rhenish petty bourgeois Catholic family, he was molded by academia rather than home or church. His character was most significantly shaped, by the University of Munich, to which hundreds of disillusioned soldiers had flocked after the armistice. He had been exempted from service because of his club foot. But he was, excuse me, but his hero was a tall, strikingly handsome veteran named Richard Flagus, pacifist and anarchist, who instilled in him ideals that would color the rest of his life. Flagus also introduced him to Dostoevsky, whose emotional mysticism inspired young Goebbels. He transferred to Heidelberg and left in 1921 with a PhD in literature. The next few years, he spent writing a romantic autobiographical novel called Michael, several plays, and numerous lyric poems. To support himself, he worked at a bank, as floorman of the Cologne Stock Exchange, as tutor, as part-time bookkeeper. It was during this frustrating period that he split with Flagus, for he had come to loathe the internationalism of Marxism. He moved to a Volker socialism, and in Hitler, quote, the incarnation of our faith and idea, he found a second Flagus to worship. At the same time, he was bound to Gregor Strasser. It was the split fealty and its inevitable denouement that helped determine the course of the NSDAP. Now, interesting, and I can't wait till later on when we get into more details of Joseph Goebbels. But here briefly, we see a man who is definitely very college educated, PhD in literature. And so I just find it amusing that as someone who has went to the top of college education in Joseph Goebbels, when he first met Hitler, he was so astonished by his speeches and all that he literally said to himself, I will follow this man until the end of time.
Education and intelligence are not the same thing.
No,
I've
sir.
argued most of my life they're mutually exclusive, but hey, what do I know? There are plenty of college educated morons out there. And just because a person is educated, a person may even be intelligent, doesn't mean that they have doesn't mean they have common sense. There are
Mm-hmm.
plenty of people who are intelligent and college educated but have zero common sense. Because how does a person who's but see, when you look at Joseph Goebbels, he was a person who was starstruck, starstruck, and was a people pleaser and a people worshiper.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, in the case of Hitler, because Hitler's inner circle were all sycophants. Goebbels, Himmler, Hess, and Goering. They were all sycophants.
Mm-hmm. No, spot on. So it only shows again to the audience, yes, education of a nation is definitely, in my opinion, is a must. But critical thinking, that is definitely more of an individual basis.
You have to work on that. I think. Um, maybe I'm wrong. I'm no expert. I'm no academician. I don't have an alphabet behind my name, but I think that critical thinking is something that one has to work at, and that one has to consciously apply in every situation in their life.
No, sir, I agree. I agree. I think, having education in and of itself is beneficial as far as on a broader scale.
Hmm.
Definitely is one trying to move up in society and become, you know, a stable citizen and all. But critical thinking, that requires, excuse me, that requires a lot of self discipline.
Yeah, self discipline, self control, dedication, things that are lacking in a lot of people. And you bring up an excellent point. What makes a productive citizen? I think that, there's plenty of history and plenty of examples of what makes a productive member of society. And
Mm-hmm.
those who are not productive members of society, what do you do with those people? What is their place in society if they're not productive members of society?
Right.
If given the opportunities and given chances, even if you're not given opportunities, even if I don't know, you know what? I'm just gonna get out of there because I'm trying to somewhat tiptoe around this thing, but I'm kind of going there. So let's just get back to the article.
I don't blame you. Next it says this struggle was complicated by an ideological dilemma. In many respects, Goebbels was still a Marxist, and he persistently attempted to convert communists to National Socialism. He was determined to evolve a theory which would erect the bridge from left to right, over which those willing to sacrifice came together. He, along with Gregor Strasser, believed that the party should champion the cause of workers in general and trade unionism in particular. This was one of the main points of difference between Hitler and Goebbels. He hoped to influence Hitler on his next trip north. Then he could prove that the only thing separating the communists and Nazis was the Reds' dedication to internationalism. At last, on the 4th of November, the two met in Braunschweig, and when Hitler shook his hands, Goebbels was in ecstasy. Like an old friend, he wrote in his diary, and those big blue eyes, like stars. He is glad to see me. I am in heaven. The personal encounter was the beginning of Goebbels' enchantment with the Fuhrer. An enthrallment intensified at a second meeting several weeks later in Plauen. Great joy. He greets me like an old friend and looks after me. How I love him. Yet within 24 hours, Goebbels was participating in an open revolt against the Central Party organization at a meeting of Northern Gauleiters. He had been delegated to help Strasser draft a new party program aimed at liberating the Fuhrer from the reactionary Munich group and turning him to the left. This program called for state ownership of all land, division of large agricultural estates among landless farmers, and nationalization of corporations. It was presented to the Gauleiters at a 2-day conference in Hanover on January the 24th and 25th, 1926. The sessions were stormy, largely due to the surprise appearance of Gottfried Feder, Hitler's proxy. To Goebbels, he was the servant of capital and interest, the revaluation, exemplary word, and principal program drafter of the movement. According to Strasser's younger brother, the Gauleiters, with the lone exception of Robert Ley, voted for the new program point by point. Finally, Feder, who had objected to almost everything, said, "Neither Hitler nor I will accept this program." He was reminded that he was only a guest, but he persisted. As he was announcing that Hitler opposed the Marxist request for confiscation of crown property as a Jewish swindle, he was shouted down. Goebbels leaped to his feet, furiously attacking the Munich leadership. He demanded Hitler's expulsion from the party unless he freed himself from their influence. This ultimatum seemed strange coming from someone who had recently written How I Love Him, but it could have been a product of that adoration, since he was convinced that the Munich bureaucrats were leading Hitler to ruin. Whatever the case, Feder's report of the fractious meeting finally roused Hitler to action. He summoned all party leaders to Bamberg on Sunday, February 14th. There was an uneasiness among the Northerners as they took their seats for the secret meeting. They were far outnumbered by the Southerners, and from the moment Hitler stepped to the rostrum, he dominated the proceedings. He had come to Bamberg aware of the problem that faced the party and the threat to his leadership. Excuse me. But his first ringing words made it clear that he was the Führer and the nucleus of the movement. There were to be no more parliamentarian debates, no more democratic procedures in the NSDAP. He would tolerate no splitter groups. Each Gauleiter, each member, was to pledge allegiance to the Führer and to the Führer alone. He did not make the mistake of assaulting either Strasser or Goebbels. Perhaps his intuition told him the truth, that both really were loyal to him and merely wanted to guide him away from the likes of Streicher and Esser. He had come to Bamberg not to humiliate the Northerners, but to bring them back into the fold. He launched his oblique attack on the leftists in purely leftist rhetoric, then offered as an alternative to the two conflicting views a new concept. He took the party out of politics and into the mythology of the leader. The original party program, he said, was the foundation of our religion, our ideology. To tamper with it would constitute treason to those who died believing in our idea. In other words, National Socialism was a religion, and Hitler was its Christ. Crucified at the Feldherrn Hall and risen after Landsberg, he had returned to lead the movement and the nation to salvation.
Uh-oh. The cult of personality. Uh-oh. Now we can see why when you joined the Nazi Party, you had to pledge an oath not to the party, not even to Germany, but to Adolf Hitler. When you were a member of the Luftwaffe, or the Army, or of the Kriegsmarine, you pledged an oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler, to the Führer.
Right. And this was even no different than what was going on in Imperial Japan.
Right.
Every faction of society, the education, the military, the politics, all socialism and all, everybody looked to the emperor as a god and only saw Japan as the land of the emperor.
Can I ask you a quick question,
Sure.
my friend? What is the general cultural view towards the royal family in Japan currently?
So, I guess you would say it really depends on the age group in Japan.
Okay.
So, those who were still alive, you could say pre-World War II, they still kind of view the emperor as, you could say, a deity type of form. So they still have high reverence for the emperor. But now, post Pacific War, and especially like the younger generation, my age, they just view the royal family as like a celebrity. as
Mm,
more of a great family of royalty within Japan.
okay.
So they don't view them as like some god status or anything. They know the history as far as like Japanese folklore, but they don't like go out of their way to constantly worship the emperor. They just see them as any normal person, but with royalty status.
Right. Okay. I got you. I understand. I was just curious.
Yeah, but back in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in Japan, everybody worshipped the emperor, and if not, that was your head.
That's funny because I've always been, because it seemed to me from the outside looking in, from the things that I've read, that General Tojo and the army were the real power during the war, not even the
Right,
emperor.
right,
That he kind of just went along with what they said and did because they held the real power.
right.
Unless I'm wrong, you know.
No, no, no. You're absolutely right. That was one of the most confusing things about Japan, and it also confused General Douglas when he became a supreme ruler after the war. Yes, the military had all the power over Japan. They created the policies. They enforced the authoritarian factions of it all. But at the same time, it's almost like when the emperor steps into the room, they had to obey whatever the emperor says or commands in that moment. It's kind of interesting the dynamics of how Imperial Japan acted.
Mm, I get it. Yeah, yeah. I've always find that to be fascinating to me, that dichotomy, because
Right. And
it makes me. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
oh no, I was going to say yeah, it even to this day like when I study, Imperial Japan, there's a lot of questions I sometimes ask myself like why did the emperor have this much power theoretically, but it just almost as if he just took a back seat whenever it came down to policies and actually running the political government and rest of society. It was just one of those dynamics where the emperor didn't knew he had that much power until the end of the war, and even then, he had to give up that power once General McDouglas took over Japan. Or excuse me, not
MacArthur.
McDouglas, MacArthur. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
General
Doug,
MacArthur
Douglas
became
MacArthur.
right. Thank you for that. General MacArthur became the supreme ruler of Japan following Japan's surrender. So it was just interesting that once the emperor realized he's kind of had more power than he think, it was still too late.
It seemed to me as it was a case of, and I don't know. I'm thinking out loud. It seemed to me a case of when he came to power, there were people around the throne who had their own best interests and they were only looking out for themselves. So they steered him in certain ways and sort of steered him away from the day to day of ruling the country and solidified their power. So by the time that he became of age, he was in a situation where he had been steered to think that he had to was totally dependent and listen to what those around him told him, rather than understand that no, you are the ruler, and in fact, you should be doing the day-to-day governing of the nation, to the
Right.
point where now there are people and they have their own unofficial um, 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 things, for lack of a better term, in place where unless the emperor just flat out said, listen, I want this one gone, I want his head off, I want this one dead, I'm going to replace you with people, now I'm going to take over the day-to-day governing of the country. That unless that happened, he was just he was just in a box. Like, yes, he has absolute rule and absolute power, but he was so conditioned and steered by those around him that even he didn't realize how much power he actually had.
Indeed. And you know, I'm just going to take a brief pause real quick. I just have someone calling me. So, one moment.
No worries.
Okay, sorry for that. But you're absolutely right. Because, and I could go into a whole discussion about the Meiji era and how, you know, beforehand it was the shogun that was controlling all of Japan
Right.
and as far as society, and then it wasn't until the Meiji era when that power was shifted over somewhat to the emperor line. But even then, he didn't have that same authoritative hand compared to the shogun, because in the Japanese constitution of that time, the emperor was pretty much just a constitutional monarch. He was
Mm.
just the figurehead of the nation. But even at the same time, okay, you're the figurehead, but you pretty much have a religion that is based upon your lineage.
Mm.
And people in Japan have so much reference for you, especially in the vein of being a god, that if he really wanted to, he could have easily taken on the same type of powers of a shogun had he realized he had that much influence.
Mm. Gotcha. Okay. I get it. Because, again, thank you. I appreciate the information because it's always been something that I found very curious.
Yeah, I can't wait till we get into Japan in the 1920s, because the whole the whole setup of Japan during this time
Mm.
is vastly different compared to the Weimar Republic. And you know, you can say, well, Japan, being that it's been a country much longer than the Weimar Republic, it's going to be more stable. Its government is probably more more organized and everything compared to the Weimar Republic. Sure, that's true, but they had some problems even that was far worse than the Weimar Republic
Mm.
during this time.
Okay. Got you. Got you.
All right, so we'll continue on. Next, it says the unexpected thrusts of his speech took the Northerners completely by surprise. Goebbels had come to Bamberg confident that Hitler could be wooed to the left, yet he neither endorsed their position nor debated the issue. Rather, he faced the party with leadership, he faced the party leadership with a choice: to reject or to accept him as the Fuhrer. To have denied him would have meant the end of the party. Strasser replied briefly and nervously. He was a beaten man. And Goebbels, except for shouting out several slogans, remained silent, except in his diary. My heart aches. Convinced it was only a matter of time before the wounds of Bamberg healed and the party arose stronger and more united than ever, Hitler took the road for financial support. On the last day of February, he was allowed to speak to the National Club of 1919 at Hamburg's prestigious Atlantic Hotel, since it was not a public rally. His words, which indicated how much he had learned in Landsberg prison, were directed not to the lunatic fringe, but to the solid German citizen. He abandoned the style of the Circus Krone, opening the address with calm persuasiveness. He told how Germany had lost the war because of Marxism, how the Reds had attempted to take over the country, and how they continued to dominate the politics of Germany. Within a year, within an hour, he had won the audience, not by pyrotechnics or emotion, but by logic, not by appeals to racism, but to patriotism, property, and prosperity. Once he began to talk of Marxism, however, his style became more forceful. In a struggle, one side must succumb. Either Marxism will be abolished or we shall be abolished. He called for a mass movement dedicated to a relentless attack on the Reds. Such a movement can only rely upon men's fists, just as one can only eradicate poison with a poisonous antidote. This movement must act in exactly that resolute manner. Victory will be decided solely by the stronger skull, greater resolution, and greater idealism. This was strong meat for an upper class audience, but it brought forth stormy applause. To win, he said, this movement had to be as intolerant as Marxism. There should be no doubts about it. We recognize clearly that if Marxism wins, we shall be destroyed. We cannot expect a different end. But if we win, we shall destroy Marxism and down to the roots without any tolerance. We shall not rest until the last newspaper is destroyed, the last organization dissolved, the last training center closed, and the last Marxist converted or eradicated. A middle course does not exist for us. It was a remarkable speech, one indicating that he was at last looking for the broadest base of support in a vigorous but legal campaign to gain control of the nation. Nor had he forgotten that he had not yet gained complete control of his own party, despite Bamberg. He began directing his charm on the two leaders of the opposition, Gregor Strasser and Goebbels. By early March, the first capitulated, despite serious reservations, and sent out a letter to his adherents, recalling all copies of his own program. It took a special trip to Munich early in April to win the second, but by the end of Goebbels' second day as the Führer's personal guest, he was so excited he had difficulty getting to sleep. The next day, Hitler gave him a conducted tour of party headquarters, followed by a 3-hour monologue. Brilliant, rehashing the Bamberg arguments. Captivated, Goebbels came over to Hitler's belief one by one, and finally surrendered in a gush of hyperbole. We ask. He gives brilliant replies. I love him. Social question. Quite new perspectives. He had thought it all out. He sets my mind at rest on all points. He is a man in every way, in every respect. Such a firebrand. He can be my leader. I bow to the greater man, the political genius. Now, okay, I'm gonna try to tiptoe as best as I can. But this sounds like an individual who has a puppy dog crush on a celebrity.
Yep, 100%. He's a sycophant.
I mean, I'll put it like this. the way Goebbels is describing Hitler and talking about how this man is such a firebrand, he could be my right. It's just like this dude have never seen anybody like him, and it's sad to say, but I even see it today, and I it's definitely in the American political world. Oh my goodness, you have individuals on both sides
Oh
that
yeah.
the presidents, especially the current and the former president, I mean, people just act like these individuals can do no wrong in their eyes. It's amazing.
It's the cult of
It's amazing.
personality, man. It really is. It's an absolute cult of personality. It doesn't matter what the person says or what they do. It's all about them. It doesn't matter what they produce or what they've accomplished. It's about the personality. It's all about the personality,
Right.
the individual. The cult of personality. Again, when you look at American politics, elections are popularity contests. It doesn't matter what they've done or what their accomplishments are or what their records are or where they stand on certain things. It's a popularity contest. How does the person make you feel? How do you like the person? It's all about the individual. It's a popularity contest. The person who's most popular wins the election. And that should scare people.
Mm-hmm.
But sadly, it doesn't.
Oh, I tell you, to be a fly on a wall in a lot of these online, especially these online political discussions, for people to be such diehards for these parties. Ah,
The funny thing is, regardless of how people may or may not feel about Candace Owens, what I would always say about Candace Owens, apologies, is
mm,
that, you know what? You need to listen to her because she's not wrong. And listen, it's not about whether you agree with you. People don't agree with any person 100% of the time. That need to say, well, I don't agree with everything that they say. That's a recent term. People have only been saying that since social media, but no one agrees with any person 100% of the time. That's unrealistic. Only children do that.
right.
But you need to listen to the things that Candace Owens has been saying and things that she's been speaking about. And it's funny how as time as time goes on and things play out, how she keeps being proven right over and over and over again. And it's not because she's a prophet, it's because she's a rational thinker.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's a rational thinker. But, again, cult of personality. Vote blue no matter who. Yeah, okay, all right. Well, you voted blue no matter who, and now you have Dementia Joe sitting in the Oval Office. You know, you said you wanted to be a fly on the wall. You know what? I would really love to be a fly on the wall in the White House. You see how, you know, Dementia Joe gets up and he's given his daily tasks and he's probably given his medication. And then they tell him, well, stand here and look pretty and say this and say that. And at the end of the day, they tell him, you did a good job, Joey. And then they pat him in bed and give him his warm glass of milk and cookies.
Ooh, boy. I think we better get to the chopper on that one.
I mean, it is, it fascinates me how being in Europe, how the media, the things that you don't see on American media, that you see in media around the world. Because, oh my God, I don't know how the hell Joe Biden is in office. And I don't know how people make excuses for this guy. I really don't. I can only assume one is it's the cult of personality, and two, the American media is not showing every the things that this guy says and does in press conferences.
Yeah. Mm, yeah. You
Okay,
know what?
go right ahead.
I was going to say America is one confusing country. And I say that because here is a here's a man, the current president of the United States, who is outside of his mental capacities.
Clearly,
I mean, you could pretty much say this individual is handicapped, no matter what. But yet and still, this is an individual that is running one of the most powerful countries in the world. And you
is
feel okay going to sleep at night?
the question you have to ask is who's really calling the shots? Because Dementia Joe doesn't know where he's from or what's going on. He can't keep things straight in his memory. Who do you think is calling the shots? Do you think it's that moron Kamala Harris? At least Joe has an excuse. He's old. He has early onset dementia. What's her excuse? She is dumber than a bag of rocks.
You know what,
Kamala
sir? I was
Kamala
going to.
Harris is a 50-year-old AOC, dumber than a bag of rocks.
Yeah. You know what, sir? Let's go ahead and wrap this up before we go
Yeah,
too
yeah, yeah.
too deep in that rabbit hole. All right. Next, it says he, meaning Goebbels, left Munich in a state of ecstasy. Farewell, Munich. I love you very much. Not only forgiven for his past sins, but confirmed as co-Gauleiter of the rural area. With Goebbels and Strasser apparently converted, Hitler once more headed north to get financial support and also to solidify his position with leftist party members. On May Day, he addressed an enthusiastic closed meeting at the City Hall in Schwerin, some 60 miles east of Hamburg. By 2 p.m., the large hall was packed with National Socialists from Altona, Hamburg, Bremen, Lubeck, and Lüneburg. Hundreds were turned away. The Hamburger Nachrichten reported that Hitler's arrival was preceded by wall-shattering music. He had developed body gestures which were, according to Müllern Skronhassen, the result of lessons from one of the most renowned seers and astrologers in Europe. His name? Eric John Hanussen. The two reportedly met the year in Berlin at the home of a wealthy socialite, and Hanussen's first words were, "If you are serious about entering politics, Herr Hitler, why don't you learn how to speak?" A master of body language, Hanussen explained that Hitler was not taking advantage of movements to emphasize his words. In the next few years, so Mollern Stronhassen claimed, they continued to meet briefly, and Hanussen not only taught him the tricks of elocution, but also advised him on the selection of his associates. Not until the end of 1932, however, would he cast Hitler's horoscope and seal his own doom.
Oh,
Yeah, so this is where Hitler starts to learn the powers of being a great orator, especially with the body language and the gestures and all. As they say, you haven't seen nothing yet in regards
right.
to how Hitler would do his speeches.
Exactly. He already knew how to manipulate people's emotions. He already had that. He knew what to appeal to. He knew how to get people behind him and follow his line of thinking. But the elocution, the public elocution, the public speaking, the mannerisms, the 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 pomp of it all, the how things look, the appearances. This is when you started to see the final smooth touches of rounding out all of the rough edges of making him the smooth, rounded, perfectly presented public politician and speaker.
Yeah. Oh boy, I tell you, and we still haven't hit, you know, the the main event in the 1920s, which is Black Friday, the day when the market crashed. That is when we will start to see the true essence of Hitler when he goes on this crusade and he talks about how, see, I predicted this. I knew this was going to happen. And the fact that that was just a golden opportunity to not only win over, segments and communities of people, but he literally won over a whole nation. And sometimes I wonder, had he not learned as far as how to use his words correctly, far as, his oratory skills and, they advised him as far as his associates and all, would he still have that same captivating ability to win over a whole nation?
You have to ask yourself a question. You have to ask yourself a question. Why is it actors are so successful when they go into politics?
Oh boy. I know where you're going with this.
I'm just going to leave that right there.
I mean, there is a trend where those who already have the public eye can transition over into the political arena.
When when President Reagan became president, one of the biggest knocks was this dude is a B-list actor who somehow became governor of California. How did this clown become president? Was Jimmy Carter really that bad? Then I remember when people said the same thing about Sonny Bono when he went into politics and eventually worked his way into Congress. And then of course we had the governor. And then when Jesse Dubois, well, that's different. He was, well, wrestler, but you know, same thing when it went into politics. We currently have an actor who was a comedian, who was the president of a certain country. So again, why is it that actors are so extremely successful when they go into politics? Because they know the things that Hitler had to learn, the polishing, the presentation, the elocution, the hand movements, the gestures, the public presentation, certain clothes to wear and mannerisms and your style of speech and the rate of speech and when to go higher and when to go lower and when to appeal to the emotion and when not to. It's an act. It's all an act. And who
Hmm.
better than someone who's literally been doing it for years?
Right.
Just saying.
Ah. Well, sir, we've covered three sections of the last chapter.
Right.
Uh, Getting ready to round things up, far as Hitler, the 1920s, and all. So far, what has been your assessment?
We see the beginnings. We see. It's so funny because I was having this conversation the other day with an associate, and Hitler. Hitler is not. Hitler is not what people have been told. What we've been told that he is. His history is written by the victors, and that he wasn't that smart. He wasn't that bright. He definitely was not educated, but he had a lot of common sense, and he knew how to manipulate emotions. He knew that much, and he knew just enough to learn enough to get by. But it was just enough given the current social and political climate in the country at that time.
Right. Yeah. To 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 me, I just find it interesting that as he grows his social circle, his influence is starting to become more refined, and it kind of shows where the right people are starting to help him refine the edges, make it more polished, make it more refined and all, so that he can appear more appealing to the masses and all. Not realizing that Hitler has his own agenda, and one thing for sure, as we definitely have shown here, in his mind, the NSDAP and just the whole Nazi movement, it's all about him and only him. And so, if you're going to become part of this movement or part of this organization, then you must have complete devotion to Hitler.
It's brilliant because when you are pledging your allegiance to him, it's not about the party, it's about him. So
Mm-hmm.
how could you not help him? You're not helping the party, you're helping him. The loyalty is to him. It's about him. And he is the party. So if you love the party, you love him. If you want to help the country, you love him. You help him. It was brilliant. Brilliant. You can't have one without having the other.
Right.
He now becomes the living embodiment of the party, the living embodiment of the country. So if you love your country, you love him. If you love the party, you love him. If you want to serve your country, you serve him. It's brilliant. It absolutely is brilliant. And it's fascinating to understand and see the psychology of it all because, as I said, man, people are sheep. They don't want to think. They want someone to do the thinking for them. And that's why they
Mm-hmm.
listen and follow to anyone who comes along and says something that makes people what? Feel good. Because when I was watching your stream, the one you did, I still have not seen the one that SKC did that precipitated it. Someone in your comment section said um, to the effects, and I'm paraphrasing.
Mm.
Yes, I see the facts, and yes, I understand what you're saying, but I feel like once you say those four words, you're done. But I feel like there is no but you feel like. Facts
Yeah.
don't care about your feelings. History does not care about your feelings. Clear, rational thinking does not care about your feelings. And if you were thinking clearly and rationally, you would not be telling me those four words. But I feel like.
Yeah, that lets me know that's an individual where as much as you try to show the evidence and show the the makings behind what you're presenting that shows solid facts and truth, because it doesn't line up with what they believe. That's the key thing. Because it doesn't line up with what they believe, they cannot accept the truth for what it is. Like,
Yeah.
sad to say, you have individuals today. that when you tell them that the Democrats founded the Ku Klux Klan, they will call you names. They will say you don't know nothing about history and all, even though this is documented facts, and even the Ku Klux Klan themselves will tell you, yes, when we were first found and originated, we were Democrats.
Yep.
it
Yeah,
is interesting.
it is because it has been proven. People. Mm, I struggle with those four words as a phrase, but I feel like because it's like you have a mentality of a child. You want things to be one way that make you feel comfortable, but the way that you want it are the complete opposite of what reality is. So because you don't want to accept reality, you're going to sit there telling me, but I feel like. And that is mind-boggling to me. It is absolutely staggering. I find that to be absolutely staggering because um, a right angle is a right angle. That has not changed.
Right.
Mathematics has not changed. So when people make statements like someone else in your comment section made the statement that the ancients the ancients knew things that we don't know. We're just dumber now. Hmm. Hmm. So did you know that um, the quote unquote ancients, as you call them, didn't have soap? People took baths once a week or less. People, if you cut your finger, you could die from that because they didn't know about germs and bacteria and hygiene. Indoor plumbing is a recent thing. I mean, we're talking in some cases the early 1900s, definitely the
Right.
1800s.
Right.
Indoor plumbing. Think about that. Refrigeration of food. But you're telling me we're dumber now. Wow. That's an amazing statement. And let's talk about the ancient. Let's talk about the Great Pyramids of Giza on the Giza Plateau. So the blocks have square edges, and the construction is corbelled construction. So every block has a slight degree tilted inward. So the blocks literally fall in towards each other, and they self-support each other. But here's the thing: even then, quote unquote ancients understood that you navigate by using stars because stars don't move. But they didn't know about stellar drift. Over time, stars do move. We know that now. The ancients didn't know that. So when people make statements like, we are dumber now, no, my friend, you are dumber now.
You know what, good sir? Again, that just goes back to how Hitler deals with intellects.
Yes.
When when a person knows what Hitler is doing and can see right through them and all, he just hit a snag to where he can't even think himself.
Right.
And he tries everything he can to, get them out of sight and everything. Because he knows that there's just individuals who clearly see right through him, who clearly sees what type of fraud he is, and they're not partaking of his tricks and the type of magic you could say he casts a spell on people. And it's the same thing I see. It's the same thing I see with conspiracy theorists. Yes, you know. I had one person tell me like, "Don't you question everything about life and everything?" And I tell him like, "Here's the thing. Yes, it's okay to question aspects of life, but there comes a point in time where when you question too much will drive you insane."
So
There's
here's the.
oh,
I'm
go right
sorry.
ahead.
Well, so scientists said man can't fly. Flight is impossible. The Wright brothers proved that wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists said there's a thing called the supersonic barrier. Scientists proved that wrong. People said that space flight is impossible. Science proved that wrong. So um, we've sent satellites, put them in orbit, and people can see the satellite from the ground, and we've placed people in other places around the globe, and people have taken cameras and see this object travel and orbit around the globe. And that's why we have day and night as the Earth rotates. But these morons will still tell you that the Earth is flat and it's surrounded by an ice wall and there's a firmament dome, so we can't go into space because space isn't real, and that the stars and our sun and the moon actually rotate around the flat Earth. So, that sounds like when people used to, when early civilizations literally worshipped the sun. That's what you're telling me. Okay.
And not only that, good sir, I'm just gonna say this too. And I think now I have enough evidence that kind of pulls in a little bit with a little bit what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
These conspiracy theorists, I know for a fact they don't travel much.
Mm.
They don't get out of their country much. They're kind of ones that out even the ones that say they like go through the military and all. I'm just gonna be honest. They too are kind of ones where yes, they go to other countries, but they're going because they're forced to go.
Right.
They don't go because they actually want to go. And that's what I try to tell people. It's like there's a difference between you going to a country because you have to, maybe for a job or some other obligation and all. But then there's those who actually go to these countries because that's who they are. That's what they have become because they want to experience those kind of things. And for a lot of these conspiracy theorists, I think that because they are so secluded, they think they know everything. Like
Right.
you can explain something scientifically to them and just out of thin air, they'll come up with their own explanation, even if it just doesn't make any sense. That still tells me this is a person who they don't really interact with a lot of people, especially outside of their country. Because if they did, I think the perspective of how the world works would drastically change.
So there was something that SKC said that I really have to jump back into.
Mm,
That he said on your stream that you did. World War II was the last time that we've seen naval combat. Everything now is carriers and missiles. So what you're saying is these flat Earth people that the Earth is flat, and that everyone who served in the American Navy, the Japanese Navy, the German Navy, the British Navy, the Italian Navy, the Australian Navy, that everyone was confronted with the truth that the Earth is flat because they served in the navies. And then when these rank and file sailors got out of the Navy, they all bought into the conspiracy theory to lie to the rest of us that the world is a globe, but it's really flat. That's
right.
that's literally what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that. Wow. it just even thinking about it just gives me headaches. Like, my God, man. I'm like, what color is the sky on the flat planet that you live on to say that Earth is flat?
You know what is something when on that same pathway SKC when he asked the question, well, how can you say that the sky is that particular color? Like who created, so to speak, that dome? And one of these dudes said, well, that's something you just have to ask God. And I
Whoa,
fell out of my
wow.
chair.
That's something you have to ask. Okay, so putting aside the fact that it's been proven light is refracted, in other words, a fancy word for bent through the moisture in the air and separates into colors, and the most abundant color is blue, so that's why skies are blue. But putting aside all of that, so you're telling me that God made a flat earth, but we're still, but no one has found this ice wall that surrounds the flat earth. No one. No one has found this ice wall that somehow where the water hits the ice wall, it's water. But no one can see this ice wall. There have been no pictures of this ice wall. And no matter how high we send planes, that nothing has ever hit this quote unquote firmament dome. Okay, I got you. I
And
got
you know what, good sir? To kind of tie this in with our World War II theme,
you.
I have also been told, and SKC provided this video of this guy, one of these conspiracy theorists, that Adolf Hitler was reincarnated not too long after the end of World War II, and that the Third Reich is still alive and well. It's underneath the ice of Antarctica.
Yeah, I have heard that. I've heard that one. I've heard that one before. I've also heard, um, well, I'm not going to go with the other one because there is some fact there, but I have heard that one that he was reincarnated, the Third Reich still exists under the ice. I mean, none of which makes any sense at all, because you're telling me that he just gave up, that, okay, he couldn't create the Germania that he wanted across Europe and in North Africa. So he just went underground. Like, that sounds very science fiction to me, but what do I know? Okay, whatever.
Right. And based on the analysis of his personality that we are dissected and all, that just
Yeah.
doesn't sound like Hitler to just, okay, I'm going to take the Third Reich, we're going to go underground, and we don't want anybody to know or hear about us. Like, I'm sorry.
No,
That's not the Hitler we are reading at the moment.
that is a completely different individual. Totally. I mean, that's just now. Had this person told me that, well, there are theories that he went to Brazil or maybe Argentina because his body was never found. Now we can have a conversation because
Right.
the second part of that, a fact, his body was never seen. The Russians
Right.
said that they took it to somewhere in Russia and they burned it or they buried it in some secret tomb. No pictures of his dead body have even been seen, even from inside the bunker beneath the Reich's chancellery. So we can at least start a conversation there. Then, if you want to go to the quote unquote the boys of Brazil, because a lot of Nazis went to Brazil and they went to Argentina, and there was a pipeline there, and a lot of Nazis were found in both countries. A lot were not found, and there was a U-boat that was unaccounted for, headed towards there, but no one knows. Maybe Hitler was on that. We don't know. Now, again, we can at least have, if you want to talk conspiracy theories, at least give me some basis in fact.
Right.
But when you tell me that there's an ice wall that surrounds the Earth, okay, because it's flat, okay, okay, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Shout out to SKC for facilitating those conversations, but even I have a limit.
Oh my God! I mean, the whole thing about yeah. Listen, I have my own thoughts about the lunar landing in '69, but to say that rockets weren't built, the rockets weren't sent up there, that men haven't been to the moon, like, guy, you need to have your head examined. You
Right.
need to have your head examined.
Especially when you saying there's no such thing as gravity. Now,
Whoa,
that I'm sorry.
whoa.
Oh yeah. I have been told that there is no such thing as gravity. That it's just a made up term that science cannot predict and everything. Even though, I mean, there was a recent article that showed that one of Einstein's theories of relativity was proven true thanks
Okay.
to the discovery of Sagittarius A black hole that's in the middle of our galaxy. But hey, what do I know?
Yes, I have read that. I haven't done enough reading about it to satisfy myself, but you know, even there, even when they frame the conversations, you know, clearly, clearly gravity exists. Whether the term is correct or not, there is some attractive force for
Mm-hmm.
planets and large planetary bodies, planets and moons. There's something there. Or are you just going to tell me that, well, you have to ask God? I mean, like, guy, like, come on. Like, what are we doing here? So here's the thing, right? Mm. If you tell me that gravity does not exist, go to the second floor of your house and jump out the window and tell me that gravity does not exist. Then we can have a conversation. Until then, I'm calling you what you are, which is an absolute moron.
Yeah. Believe me, I've come to terms with the fact that these people have more in common with Hitler than they even realize. So they can spout all this information and whatnot, but at the end of the day, I'm just like, yeah, you have the same sociological setup as the former Führer of Nazi Germany.
You know, I'm just thinking out loud here, but it's like these people, again, I've noticed a consistent theme. They're emotional because they always tell
Mm-hmm.
you those four words. But I feel like, it's those four words, but I feel like. And it's like, to me, it's as if these people don't understand science, they don't understand technology. So anything that they do understand makes them feel good, so they latch onto it. Because I've noticed a consistent theme with people who think like this. They'll spout out these pseudoscientific BS, and if you press them on it, you're going to get down to, well, you got to ask God, or we aren't meant to know this, or, well, it's a level of knowledge that the ancients had. It was lost, and we don't have it now because we're dumbed down because of Yakub and the chemicals in the water and the chemtrails and the aliens, and there's an inch of topsoil left. And, it's like, come on, guy. Come on.
Yeah. You know, that's definitely something we'll have to save on the back end because there's more I want to say, but we're on a public platform, so let me just go ahead and wrap this up real quick. So for those who are listening in, thank you for tuning in to this podcast. So Wednesday coming up, we will be wrapping things up with the last of Hitler in the 1920s and the Weimar Republic. And then, starting next month, we will go from the Weimar Republic to Soviet Union, and we will get to hang out with our buddy Joseph Stalin and what was going on in Mother Russia back in the 1920s. So that's going to be an interesting development there.
Yeah, because Lenin never wanted Stalin to take over the party. He never wanted to run the country, and
Nope.
exactly what he did not want to happen happened. Now, Leninism is not Marxism.
Nope.
Leninism is not Stalinism. And Stalinism is communism. But Leninism is not communism and it's not Marxism. Socialism is not Marxism. Each comes from the root tree of Marxism. Granted, fair enough, but each one is different in its own way. And you cannot explain that to most people. You absolutely cannot explain it to Americans. You
Mm.
cannot. Because they have been socially conditioned. Communism, bad, therefore any ism is bad. Not that Americans even know what communism actually is, or what socialism is, or what Marxism is, because people have never read Marx. They don't know what Marxism is, therefore they don't know what communism is and what socialism is. They don't know. But they've been conditioned that it's bad. So if it sounds like communism, then it must be bad.
Well, good sir, that's where we come in because when we start to delve into Russia during the 1920s, we will do some segments where we actually explain the difference between those isms, as I would say. So that way, when we go into Joseph Stalin, our audience will know, okay, this is what they were following, this is what they were all about, and at least this the difference between these many sectors. Because that's another thing. Many folks don't realize that Leninism actually incorporated capitalism.
Yes, it did, which is another thing. And it doesn't matter who says it. Capitalism and socialism are not the same things.
Nope.
Capitalism is a system of economics. Socialism is a system of governance
Mm-hmm.
because almost every country on this planet now uses capitalism as a system of economics. The two are separate. They are literally apples and oranges. They have nothing to do with each other. But that has been the global accepted narrative, so everybody runs with it.
Right.
And then the funny thing is, you can say what you want about capitalism, it's greed and it's top heavy and permanent underclass and disadvantage. You get no arguments from me on any of those points. But my question to you, and the same question that any economist worth his salt will ask you, show me a better system.
Mm-hmm.
We can have all the moral conversations that we want to have about capitalism. Show me a better economic system. Show me something that works better.
Exactly. Because if there was something that was way better than capitalism, trust and believe, a lot of countries would have been using that other system by now.
Can you find systems that are morally better and are better for the people as a whole? Yes, you can. Absolutely can. I can point out um, cooperatives as one off the top of my head. However, we're talking about a nation state.
Mm-hmm.
Show me a system that works better for a nation state than capitalism. I'm not saying there isn't. I'm literally asking. Show me one that works better, because no economist has found one yet.
Right. Indeed. Well, with that said, we just want to thank everybody for tuning in to tonight's episode of The War Room. I am your host, Sigma Jones. My co host, Mr. Logic's Finest, as always, is here to help guide the ship and everything. Until next time.
Auf Wiedersehen.